I'm happy to welcome Grace Halden. So Grace Halden is the program director for the MA Medical Humanities and co-director of the Center for Medical and Health Humanities at Birkbeck. So Professor Grace Halden specializes in reproductive health, assisted reproduction, donor conception, and bioethics in literature and culture. Grace Halden's interdisciplinary work spans literary studies, creative nonfiction, and medical humanities. Her award-winning, multi-funded research project, Cyborg Conception, explores cultural responses to donor conception and diverse family formations. So in 2024, she published Cyborg Conception, Cultural and Critical Responses to Solo Motherhood by Choice, combining lived experience and critical writing on solo motherhood via gamete donation. So she kindly agreed to come to Montreal for her presentation on this book, which is entitled Reckless or Radical Cultural Responses to Solo Motherhood Through Gamete Donation. So thank you, Grace Halden.
Well, hello everyone. Thank you for the introduction. It sounds really impressive when you say it like that. So hopefully I can live up to the 9-hour trip and I don't disappoint you all. But thank you so much for inviting me and having me here. It really is an honor to talk in front of you all. Yeah, as introduced, I am a senior lecturer in modern and contemporary literature at Birkbeck College, University of London, where I do specialise in looking at narratives of assisted reproduction. My recent work, I've got some on the screen now, explores donor conception primarily and diverse family formations, particularly solo parenting and same-sex parenting through cultural narratives and lived experience. So although this isn't the focus of my talk, I feel it's disingenuous not to say this at the outset, but I am a solo mother by choice through sperm donation, and I do write broadly on this. And on the screen, I've got a few examples of recent publications. So my book published last year examines the stigma surrounding solo parenthood alongside memoir and cyborg liberation theory, which I'm not going to talk about today because it's a whole sort of side thing. I also write for industry, and the booklet in the middle I will talk about later on was written about the solo motherhood pathway and for clinicians across the UK. And I also write more personally about my experiences in creative nonfiction. Pen Sketch is an example of that was published at the beginning of this year, and that's freely available online. So I do try to write across the spectrum. But here I'm talking today about my academic research for the book Cyborg Conception. In my research, I do tend to focus on the 1980s onwards, and this is because this was the year that the organisation Single Mothers by Choice was established by Jane Mates. And from this point on, I see more mainstream representation of solo motherhood and an exponential growth in solo motherhood by choice, or more so, I would say, a more explicit articulation of actively choosing solo motherhood by choice. It was also in the 1990s in the UK that the Donor Conception Network was established, and now the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Authority in the UK notes that 1 in 170 births are donor conceived, which is quite a staggering statistic if you really think about it. And according to Cryos, a leading gamete bank in the US, 50% of women choosing donor sperm are solo mothers to be. So we can see an exponential growth from the 1980s in the ways in which this is articulated quite explicitly. So I'm really grateful that Sasha began this talk, because she started the conference with her paper on the couple norm. And ultimately, this is what I'm going to be engaging with throughout this paper, looking at this sort of tenacity and how this is articulated in narrative and popular culture. In this talk, I'm going to focus on a very small element of my book, and that is on how solo mothers are portrayed in some problematic popular culture narratives. And then in the second half of the talk, I'm going to look at some testimony offered by solo mothers by choice with lived experience that actively try to challenge some of these stigmas and stereotypes. So before we get started, I want to think about these three perspectives on solo motherhood on screen. I should say also there's going to be a lot of quotes throughout this because I look at stories. So I will get to them. I will read them out for you. So you don't need to worry about trying to listen to me and read. I will go through them for you. But it's very narrative driven. Anyway, the first quote on the screen is from the bioethicist David James Velleman, who is very openly opposed to donor conception. And he writes in his article, Family History, first comes love, then comes marriage, and then the proverbial baby carriage. Well, it's not such a ridiculous way of doing things, is it? So here we obviously have the promotion of a heteronormative nuclear family construction as the ideal child-rearing environment. And if we follow this logic, if interventions such as donor conception is immoral, then there's a suggestion inherently that certain members of our society are ethically obligated not to conceive. The second quote on the screen is from a young adult novel called Donut Head. 11-year-old Franklin, who is a donor-conceived child, reflects on stereotypical beliefs about single mother families being sites of endangerment. And he reflects, my mother is husbandless. This is both devastating and out of my control. I have mentioned to my mother that coming from a single parent home puts me at a disproportionately high risk for all sorts of life-threatening behaviours like alcohol and drug abuse, depression and anger management issues, and being abducted by kidnappers on the rare evening she has to work late. Thank you for laughing. The novel itself is not necessarily opposed to solo parenting, but the stigmas highlighted here by young Franklin explores how stereotyped this pathway can be. And in the last quote on screen, we have a quote from the fiction story, What to Expect. And here a solo mother by choice, Emily, mourns her decision to become a solo mother through sperm donation while pregnant. And she worries, who would love her now? What had she done to herself? How had she so irrevocably messed up her life? So here we have the suggestion that motherhood is a disastrous mistake and a pathway to misery if you try to embark on that solo. So these quotes, although they articulate that diverse family formations in literature are more common and explicit today, they do not always necessarily embrace new families nor positively recognise diverse origin stories. So overall, my work looks at storytelling and explores how important storytelling is as a method through which to navigate new conception of family building strategies. And in fact, transparency, openness and sharing is really important in the donor conception community. Being able to talk about construction of family and diverse origins is really essential. However, in the first part of this talk, I want to look at a couple of reoccurring negative themes surrounding solo motherhood. And the first one I'm going to look at is the fact that solo motherhood is often presented in narratives as a fundamentally bad choice, one that usually you will regret on some level. So in many texts, the choice of being a solo parenthood is presented as a flippant or spontaneous decision. In Call Me Mimi from 2009, Mimi's mother is a solo mother by choice who is described as choosing sperm donation spontaneously one day. Yeah, as you do. And I quote, when she turned 39, she divorced the guy, sold the house, coloured her hair blonde, went to a sperm bank in Toronto. Similar occurs in The Other Half of Me from 2007, in which the solo mother by choice is described as acting impulsively. Quote, after a lunch meeting in Santa Monica, my mum visited a doctor's office off Santa Monica Avenue and picked a donor. In this text, donor conception is presented as an unfortunate premature decision because during pregnancy, the mother went on to meet a suitable man who would become the father of her 3 subsequent children. So the message is that if she had just slowed down, just waited, just had faith in the tenacity of the couple norm, then she would have saved herself this aggravation of choosing donor 142 from a sperm bank. In Joyce Sweeney's Headlock from 2006, the choice to become a solo mother is absolutely disastrous. The mother embarks on this journey on a whim and eventually becomes dissatisfied with the responsibility of childcare. And I quote, "Mum felt that every woman should experience childbirth, so at 43, she picked my dad out of a catalogue and presto, fulfilled for 4 years anyway." So reference here to a generic catalogue, but a lack of reference to specific donor details and the decision-making process links the decision to a frivolous act of commercialisation, of shopping, of frivolous decision-making. And he does end up abandoned by his mother, who was more interested in romance, the couple norm, than she was in parenting. Problematic stereotypes appear also in adult literature, film and television. Jane Jaffa argues that single mothers are increasingly accepted on screen because they are seen as actively choosing parenthood, with characters like Rosin Fraser on the screen here gaining approval with audiences. However, there is a really important distinction here. Fictional women who choose solo motherhood before conception are still often portrayed as irresponsible. This is because, broadly speaking, solo motherhood by circumstance in which a relationship has failed in some way is often presented as sad, unfortunate, and unintentional, whereas choosing solo motherhood from the outset is presented as selfish and narcissistic. Solo motherhood by choice is a popular comedic subplot and has been for many years. I'm going to start with an example from Friends in which Monica Geller tries different strategies to get over a breakup. One strategy is to make a lot of jelly, and the other strategy is to have a baby with a donor. This decision lasts a day. She makes a lot of jelly instead. She doesn't have a child through a donor, but it lasts a day before it's abandoned as a pathway. In My Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, Rebecca Bunch becomes an egg donor for her solo parent father friend, Daryl, and this decision is not adequately thought out by either party. Daryl becomes very confused, thinking that she should be taken on a maternal role when she's an egg donor, and Rebecca often forgets that she donated in the first place. And in Parks and Recreation, Anne Perkins does decide to become a solo mother, but abandons the pathway when she's faced with potential sperm donors with the names Sewage Joe and the Douche. She decides she doesn't want to have a little douche, so she abandons that pathway and eventually has a baby with her partner. Content warning for this one. In the comedy Netflix series, The Duchess from 2020, written and starring comedian Catherine Ryan, donor conception is described as a shameful practice as, and I quote, "stick in some pathetic random loser's spunk up yourself," end quote. The Duchess documents Catherine's journey to become a solo mother by choice initially. However, so idealised is the co-parenting route that she eventually opts to co-parent with her criminal ex-partner, despite their relationship being one of abuse in which her ex has called her a cunt, a tired old gash, and pathetic skank groupie. Yet Catherine chooses to co-parent with an abusive man that she describes as the worst human being that I have ever met. Why would she do this? She does this because the co-parenting model, even if abusive and toxic, is preferred or idealised over the solo motherhood by choice route. In fact, positive portrayals of solo motherhood by choice often only come in narratives in which solo motherhood is eventually abandoned and matrimony or a long-term commitment is secured. The prevalence of the happy ending in fiction through the incorporation of a father into the family unit chimes with Jane Jaffa's claim that while single mothers may gain respect for how confidently they exercise their autonomy, the respect is most quickly earned if single mothers operate as if they were a nuclear family temporarily, minus the living dad. So in these stories, not only is a happy ending obtained, but respect for the single mother is more easily achieved, as the romance genre implies that singledom is temporary and fixable, with the caveat that you only get this fix if you are a good woman. We're going to come on to that now. So we find good examples of this in, yes, some of you know this, working mums. Brace yourself, buckle in. So in Working Mums, which has had a long run, recently finished, career-driven Sloane decides to become a solo mother through sperm donation. Her sister asks her, "Are you really ready to become a mother? I mean, what about your job? How are you going to manage all that?" And Sloane replies, "I don't know. I'll figure it out." And figure it out she does, because during her pregnancy, she starts to date her ultrasound technician and co-parents with him when the child is born. Sloane's return to work is only made possible because she discovered a boyfriend during pregnancy, and he acts as a stay-at-home parent and seemingly has no personality outside being this convenient co-parent. She's not the only example of this trope attempted in this TV show. In season 3 of Working Mums, solo parent-to-be Bianca struggles with worries over the solo pathway, and she gets into a rather convenient romantic relationship with her friend Frankie. The pair instantly consummate their relationship and enfold the pregnancy within a two-parent family unit. Bianca even tells Frankie, who is a woman and a lesbian, that Frankie is the best father her child could ever ask for, in an act to present the two-parent family as still somewhat male-female coded. Beyond the solo mother pathway, Working Mums includes two single mothers by circumstance, one of whom has a similar salvation storyline to Sloane and Bianca. Following divorce, Val is a struggling single mother, struggling to raise two abusive sons, and then she meets her fiance, who straightens the sons out. So strong male model enters the household, fixes things. And the final season concludes with just one single mother represented, Jenny. Jenny is a single divorcee, and she is the show's villain, obviously. Jenny is presented as a selfish, compulsive liar, a malevolent schemer, and a narcissist who is unfaithful in relationships, and she's a negligently terrible mother. The message, unfortunately, seems to be that good women will find partners, whereas toxic characters like Jenny remain single. And in Working Mums, the success these mums have is the achievement of a relationship that enables them essentially to be working mums. So when Jane Jaffa optimistically states that, that's not peer reviewed, that's Reddit. So when Jane Jaffa optimistically states that, in comparison with historic treatment, today single mums aren't immediate objects of shame and exclusion, the word immediate is really key here, especially in Working Mums. The initial presentation of single or solo motherhood is not shaming nor problematic at the start. However, as the storylines progress, it becomes clear that a more ideal parenting model is that of co-parenting, and this model is quickly and successfully adapted. While single mothers are not immediately presented as objects of shame and exclusion, at least in the series Working Mums, this is ultimately what does unfold over the seasons. Partnering fixes not only the so-called problem of one-parent family, but also identifies which women are good enough to be saved and supported. And this drive to secure legitimacy through parenting is so important in fiction featuring solo parents that Margaret Nelson found that sexual intercourse is used as a plot device to validate conception in Hollywood films featuring donor conception. The romantic connection between the biological mother and the donor transforms a donor-conceived child into a legitimate one within a heteronormative romantic framework. And Nelson identifies that in most romantic comedies featuring sperm donation, a heterosexual romance effectively erases the role of donation in the narrative. And two examples she gives of many are The Switch and The Backup Plan, in which a happy ending is achieved when a man becomes part of this family unit and essentially erases the donor conception storyline. So in the examples I've presented here, it is not only, though, via heterosexual sexual intercourse that conception is legitimised. What I call corrective solutions occur when a solo mother by choice enters any sort of co-parenting relationship. It does not matter if this is heterosexual, if this is romantic, healthy, or stable. I argue that corrective solutions are not about sex and heteronormativity, but are focused on solving the problem of single motherhood and preventing the perpetuation of the struggling solo mother stereotype, which is the single mother is still very much demonized in society as being a drain on resources. And while the heterosexual nuclear family is preferred as the ideal structure, any co-parenting structure will seemingly do, even if it is with the worst human being on the planet. So now, palate cleanser, I'm going to look at some testimony. So as part of my research for my book, I interviewed solo mothers by choice in the UK, and here I want to focus on their experiences. And I'm going to use their testimony to tackle some of the themes that we have dealt with so far. And that is of the nuclear family ideal in these narratives, the reckless and spontaneous decision-making process of choosing sperm donors, the solo mother as an inferior family model / last resort, plan B, consolation prize, and also that solo parenthood is not presented as a legitimate way to a family plan. So I'll start with the dominance of the nuclear family in stories, especially stories for children and in Disney. So many of the interviewees mentioned the conditioning they felt they had experienced growing up with stories really focusing on happy ever afters and happy endings revolving around the nuclear family model. So, for example, interviewee Michelle noted that being a solo mother was not her original plan for family construction and made reference to the happy ever after dream underscored in stories. She says, in an ideal world, I'd have met the right person to start a family with and live happily ever after. Nicola articulates concern over how the conditioning of fairy tale ideals can harm reproductive decision making. She explains that because she, quote, grew up on Disney movies and fairy tale endings, that there was an expectation of partnership that was not only presented as guaranteed, but as the key to happiness. Nicola pointed out that the conditioning of girls and women to need a partner for validation is pervasive, and as a result, it took her 5 years to be comfortable with the decision to embark on solo motherhood through donation. She said that she needed time to adjust to this radically new vision that she herself did not have a problem with, but she felt difficult to balance with the expectations that she had felt growing up. Despite the common theme of choosing sperm donation as a spontaneous and reckless decision in many of the narratives that I looked at in popular culture, many of the solo mothers that I interviewed described waiting a very long time and in many cases taking years to start treatment. For Sarah B, she waited until the point at which waiting longer would have jeopardized her chances of motherhood. She chose the solo route despite initially struggling with the decision to conceive solo. She says, if it was not due to my age, I likely would have delayed this longer, although now I have my daughter, I wish I'd done it many years ago. And in Nicola's case, it took her 7 years to finish her conception journey. And when she mentions that her journey was hard and tiring, and there were times when I really didn't want to do any more injections, it's hard to see this as a spontaneous, reckless decision one makes, just because you happen to be on the same avenue as a sperm bank. Waiting for years and undergoing complex processes, is not uncommon. From starting the journey to giving birth, it took Sam 5 years. Likewise, Eleni underwent 5 IUI treatments, that's intrauterine insemination, and 3 rounds of IVF, relating that the entire process made her feel completely broken. So in all of the interviews that I conducted, and certainly I think the general feeling is that solo motherhood by choice is rarely described as a rash action by the mothers themselves. Many participants discussed how their plans for a family evolved over the years, that the decision was not as simple as viewing solo motherhood by choice as a plan B or a consolation, but as a valid option of many pathways. Victoria notes that her main goal was always motherhood. She says, I didn't want to risk not having a child and a family of my own, so my plan A, marriage first then children, became plan B. Likewise, for Alexis, despite originally intending to co-parent with a partner, she identifies solo parenting as a plan A because the main objective was to become a mother. The mode in which this was achieved was flexible and changed over time. She says, I've always felt comfortable knowing I was going to bring children up by myself. I tried to find the traditional expected way of finding someone, always knowing if it didn't happen, I would go down the solo route. Michelle makes a similar point when she notes that plan B became plan A. Although Michelle originally wanted the traditional happy ever after of a marriage and a nuclear family, the adjustment of her plan was not something that caused her concern overall. Sarah A. not only spoke about the malleability of plans, but that different life stages involve different priorities. And she says, now I am happy as a single woman. I feel more like I made a plan A in my post-45 years, as I now know what I need and feel empowered over my own life. In many cases, the option to pursue solo motherhood through Gamete donation was considered to be a practical and positive option, while other avenues, such as co-parenting, were first explored. Elaine notes that becoming a solo mother by choice was one option in the overall plan to become a mother, and that the motherhood was the plan, and that the mode in which this occurred was entirely flexible. She says, I wanted to be a mother, and that was my plan. I had always been open since my 20s to achieving that in whatever way possible. I always felt comfortable exploring the option of being a solo mum. Likewise, Sam identifies the fluidity of choice and adapting what plan A means based on circumstance. She says, solo motherhood had always been an option for me. Ideally, would I have a partner to help me out? Sure, that would be nice, but it definitely wasn't the be all and end all. I was approved as a solo adopter way before I looked into donor conception, so it has definitely never been a plan B option. And of course, the choice of choosing solo motherhood is complex and unique to each individual. In all the examples presented here, unlike the representation in popular culture, making the decision is often articulated as taking time and careful consideration. Thank you very much. So this issue is slightly beyond the parameters of this talk, so I'm just going to gloss over it quite quickly. But many of the participants discussed the lack of education and awareness around conception pathways in the UK, often articulating that they would have perhaps come to a decision a lot earlier if it was on their horizon, if they did feel confident in thinking this was a valid option for me. So I'm just going to quote Victoria out of the many responses I had here. But Victoria underscores the issue of UK education focusing primarily on contraception in a heterosexual relationship. She says, I wasn't actually aware of it, solo motherhood via donation, as even an option, and not sure how I came across it, to be honest. But then I don't think family planning is properly discussed either. We are told how to not get pregnant, but not informed about the body clock fully, such as egg quality decreasing with age, options to freeze eggs and embryos. The awareness needs to be presented and discussed much, much earlier, so we are better informed and can make some decisions potentially earlier. Related to the desire to highlight reproductive options to other women, the openness many solo mothers by choice show towards sharing experiences is rooted in the general appreciation of the importance of transparency and storytelling. And as I said at the start, this is very important in the donor conception families, because we need to articulate this as a positive pathway for donor conceived people. And not associated with secrecy, embarrassment, shame, and so on. And Nicola notes the multi-layered importance of storytelling in her own life, about how storytelling leads to personal empowerment, but also a sense of normalcy for her children. And she says, I was initially concerned about people's opinions of me. At some point, I accepted that I had no control over what others thought, but could control what I thought and felt. I've actually found the more confidently I talk about having used a donor, the more comfortable people seem to be talking about it. I've had many, that's what I would have done if I hadn't met my partner, and several, I wish I'd done that, from divorced women. I'm completely comfortable with my decision now and will happily talk about it to others. I feel it's important for me to talk confidently about my decision to use a donor, as I don't ever want my children to feel anything but confident about their origins. One of the shared experiences that really struck me when I was doing these interviews was the reasoning behind why these women were choosing to participate free in these interviews. And the participants all articulated a desire to share their experiences and educate others about the pathway due to a lack of accurate information, a lack of education, and inaccuracies in how donor conception is usually discussed. In many respects, I felt that these testimonies were an act to highlight a route for women not often discussed, and when they are discussed, they are tackled in mainstream culture in often negatively framed ways that contribute to a sense of shame and a want to not share these experiences. So I felt these testimonies were really important, endeavours. So I'm just going to wrap up now. I might be a minute or two over, but I'm just wrapping up. So, of course, while lived experience narratives should not be interpreted as collective truth or a community fact, I mean, these are just a handful of experiences. And of course, some experiences are negative. Some people do struggle. There are wider considerations we need to think about, like this is a site of privilege. Choosing solo motherhood is a site of privilege, and it's not open to everybody. It can be quite sort of blithely considered to be a sort of a feminist and liberational act, but not everyone feels that way. Some people do strongly mourn the lack of partnering, some don't. So I don't want to present a skewed reading here. And there, of course, there are some positive explorations of solo motherhood in popular culture, but what I've tried to present here is that there is a tapestry of what it means to be both a patient and a member of a community, and present a snapshot of a couple of issues from a UK perspective. And of course, there will always be nuances. But I think that there is such overwhelming negative portrayals that it's interesting to look at some of the positive counter arguments that are coming through testimony. And so, I mean, what can we do here? What can we do as scholars and as people with lived experience? And I think, the best way is to try to combine this research, lived experience and industry knowledge. And I think it's, my paper coming after Sasha's is so important, because Sasha obviously comes from a discipline that looks at the data and the facts and global or international perspectives, and I'm coming at this from narratives and storytelling. And these vital connections, like these conferences, are really important to unite sort of practitioner and academic and creator and community. And this collaboration is essential when dominant narratives in popular culture and bioethics can be skewed and contribute to a negative framing of diverse family formations. And I just want to draw attention to one ways in which we have tried in a localized way in the UK to push against this. This booklet on the screen here, I developed through funding with the Wellcome Trust, and it's entitled Independent Family Planning, Choosing Solo Motherhood Through Gamete Donation, a Guide for Fertility Healthcare Professionals. And this was written by 15 individuals of the donor conception community. It was written in collaboration with Bourne Hall, Gamete Bank and Clinic, and in collaboration with the Donor Conception Network, and it's been shared with UK clinics across the UK, and it is freely available to clinicians and also solo parents-to-be. And this incorporates lived experience, research, testimony, and art. And this is one example of how we can intervene in some spaces. This is an example of how we can intervene in industry. to offer resources that sort of prevent this top-down approach of practitioners explaining a pathway to a community. How can we engage in meaningful conversation? But what do we do about popular culture and these dominance of these stigmatized readings of diverse family formations? Well, I think it's listening to voices like Nicola's and Victoria's, etc., and ensuring when creative works are offered, we think about the impact this can have, not just on solo mothers, but obviously on donor conceived children, and not feeling like they're coming from a space of flippant, reckless decision making. And of course, it will always be impossible to conclusively and thoroughly present the varied experiences of solo mothers. But, I do hope that through conferences such as this and sharing stories and research across platforms in open access, memoir, podcast, blog, magazine, open access books like Sasha's, that these negatively skewed narratives in bioethics and popular culture can be challenged. Thank you. Thank you very much for your time.